Hello and welcome to Mapping the College Audition. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA. That's Musical Theater College Auditions. Check us out at mtca.com. And today we've got Conrad Ricamora on the pod. For our newer listeners, in these artist exploration episodes, we aim to explore the paths to success that artists have forged and are still forging, and tease out how their theatrical training has helped them to blaze that trail. Conrad on this episode talks about his journey to success in both TV, film, and Broadway, and also his exciting new scholarship fund called The Right to Be There, which we will post a link to in our show notes, and I urge all of you to donate to it. We also talk a bit about the controversy and the moment that it's sprung out of, and it's kind of inspired me to do a little social media topper for you all to this episode. Normally we save our takeaways for the ends, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that in this takeaway as well, but this just feels a bit too topical, so I do want to say it here too, which is, can I urge you all, can we all please just take a look at our social media usage and our social media diet? I mostly say this for myself, just to say it out loud, as somebody who is, I'm not particularly engrossed by social media on like a personal level, but I absolutely get sucked in surrounding all of this political stuff. I'm not the kind of person who's been like rage clicking on people's career success or looking at their vacation photos and getting really jealous, but you can absolutely catch me deep in a comment section. And I'm not going to go into the politics of the moment. I really do try to keep this pod at least as partisan politic free. It's impossible with an artistic pod not to talk about politics at all, but we're not going to talk about partisan politics as much as possible. But I will just say, for me, this has been a rough week online. And honestly, it's been a rough year online. It's been a rough few years online going back to the pandemic. It's just rough out there. The social media is rough. And I think maybe it's just worth saying in general, especially as artists, that I don't think we spend enough time talking publicly about the ways in which our devices, especially our social media feeds, really negatively impact our psychological health. And we could talk about that in general, just as human beings, how important that is. But I'm going to say, especially as artists going through this process, given how we talk about all the time, how important our psychology is. If you would tell yourself it's time to like eat clean because I got a big show or a big audition process, maybe you want to think about what it'd be like to feed clean, to keep your feed clean with your devices as well. I am definitely not the right person to like tell anyone what to do or how to do it here. I'm far from an expert when it comes to the social media world. But I guess I just want to say, in case anyone needs to hear it out loud, that there's nothing wrong with you if you notice how it is negatively affecting you. And I think you would be smart, and if it is, to make changes to address whatever those negative effects are. And I think that goes for all of us, whether you're an artist or not, right? That all of us are more sensitive to this stuff than we sometimes want to admit. But especially as artists, it is like our job to be professionally sensitive. Right? We are training as empaths who take in the world and then hold the mirror up to nature. So how does that like pile of toxic crap coming through our devices not negatively affect us? And then how is that going to affect our ability to perform at the highest level artistically? And the other thing I want to throw out there, and this is really the reason for this whole takeaway, the reason I wrote this down, I was like, I need to do a little topper at the beginning, is that I know we have a lot of parent listeners. And I think this message applies to all of you equally as well. If you were listening to that whole thing and thought, oh, that's good, I'll tell my kid that, maybe just take a second and see if there's something for you to take to heart as well, right? You got to put your mask on before you can help others. And if you're trying to support your child through a stressful process while you yourself are a ball of stress, maybe the best thing you can do is just tend to yourself a little bit, right? We talk about this a lot in the later stages of the process as we get closer to that prime audition season, but it's absolutely still true now. A bit of self-care for the parents can go a long way to helping your child as well. Okay, that's enough of that. Just a quick reminder to check our social media diets from someone whose media diet has been pure junk food the past week, and I feel like a trash bag. If you do feel like you just need to post something online this week, maybe it should be a rating and review for this very program where you might get me to read it on the show with a promised accent or dialect. So here's John G. and me. Game changer. MTCA has made all the difference in our college audition season, grade 12, and pre-season, grade 11. It's given us great insight into schools and helped students create her college list and feel more knowledgeable before heading in the audition. It's been a serious game changer. Oh, thank you, John G. and me. And I appreciate you hanging on to the preseason and the audition season metaphors. And boy, my voice and dialect teacher would not be proud of what just happened there. But you know what? We're going with it. All right, that's plenty of intro. I know I'll be seeing many of you in the next few weeks as we're diving deep into mock season. Really, we have 3 mocks in a row the next 3 weeks in New York City. Before then, we head off to Pittsburgh Unifieds. And then we're going to begin our mock travel season where we're going to be hitting Chicago and LA in November. Oh my. If you're hoping to see me digitally for a bit, do check out our upcoming webinar. That's this Thursday at 9 o'clock Eastern with me and Amy Breslow, one of our college advisors, where we're chatting about scholarship opportunities and how to navigate those as you move into your audition season. As always, those webinars are open to both MTCA families and non. If anyone wants to check those out, they happen at least once a month and often more as we get into the fall and winter. All right, and with that, let's dive into this interview with the great Conrad Ricamora. Well, we are so excited to be joined by Conrad Ricamora. He's a Grammy, Tony, and Lucy Lortel nominee. He studied at Queen's University of Charlotte before getting an MFA in acting from the University of Tennessee. He's been all over your TV screens in How to Get Away with Murder, How to Die Alone, The Resident, Dying for Sex, currently filming The Devil Wears Prada 2. He's been on Broadway in The King and I, in Here Lies Love, and currently, or most recently, in Oh, Mary, for which he received a Tony Award nomination. Conrad, welcome on the show. How are you feeling today?
Hi, Charlie. I'm feeling great. Thanks so much. I have the day off from filming today, so I'm just enjoying some relaxing time, catching up on rest.
We love it. And the magic of technology, they're never going to know this is our second time going through this because of some technical difficulties. So
I
we
know.
don't even need to tell
We're
them.
such good actors.
We ruined it. You were starting to tell me just a little bit about your journey to sort of finding acting. So as a young person, I noticed a tennis player, a tennis scholarship. Catch me up to like, what was your relationship with what you were looking for in college? And like, what were you thinking? Was any part of you thinking about being an actor that young?
No, when I was a little kid, I remember loving like singing and dancing. But then as soon as I hit middle school, and I grew up on Air Force bases in like the 80s and the 90s. And so like the expressive men were very much not encouraged. So I stopped doing that and started playing tennis. And that kind of took over. I kind of channeled all of my energy into that.
Yep.
And that took me to undergrad, where I got a tennis scholarship at Queen's University of Charlotte in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then I studied psychology just because I liked the way, like, I like studying performance, whether it's as a tennis player, because, you know, athletes are performers as well. Anything that you do in front of an audience is a performance. And then I took this acting class that changed my life. I was assigned a monologue from Lemon Sky by Lanford Wilson, and it was about a kid who met his estranged parent for the first time, and that was my real life experience. And I felt like I could speak with authority in front of an audience. And I wasn't a super extroverted person, but to feel that connection when I was, you know, normally really shy, was something that was electrifying. And, you know, I've been chasing ever since.
So cool. Boy, are you the perfect guest for this podcast in so many ways. We're going to talk about a number of different issues, but we love the athlete-artist analogies. We make a lot of those on this podcast, certainly. And then Leo, my partner, is going to love the tennis. He always is talking about the inner game of tennis. He's
That book changed my life. I read that as a teenager. Yeah.
Yep. So fun. But really, I mean, it is, you know, sports, I think, in sports and drama, or sports and acting and performance have so many correlations already. It seems especially tennis with being a solo sport, and the psychology and the, you know, you're up there all alone, you're in charge of your own career and getting yourself off the mat. You know, it's just being a solo sport. There's so many analogies there.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I think that the idea of bombing in either like as a performer, whether it's an audition or on stage or on a tennis court, you know, it's the same muscle that you exercise when you go through that feeling of shame of like doing something potentially that's bad, and then picking yourself back up and continuing to like move forward.
It's so true. Yeah. It feels like, yeah, I love it. Okay. But we'll talk maybe a little bit more of that at the end, but give me a little bit of so then in college, this sparked for you. Was it right after college? Then you go to the MFA?
No, I started working in community theater, and then it started paying. And then I got a local agent in Charlotte and started doing like industrials and, kind of cobbled together this little like career as a local actor in Charlotte, you know, whether it was low paying theater jobs with industrial like work, and then supplementing that with working at a coffee house. And then I knew I was going to be doing this for the rest of my life. So I started looking at fellowships that theaters would offer. The Shakespeare Theater in DC
Yep.
offered a great fellowship, and the Walnut Street Theater in
I did the
Philly.
very apprenticeship at the Shakespeare Theater to see if you can believe it.
What's
Yeah.
that?
I did that very apprenticeship at the
Oh,
Shakespeare Theater.
amazing. Yeah, I didn't get in. But I got into the Walnut Street one.
And look how
And
it's hurt your career, Conrad. And that's why my career is so much farther along than yours. It's
that's
because of
right.
that apprenticeship.
I know. I need to reapply, see if they'll take me.
I'll bet they'd take you now. I do think they would.
But yeah, no, that was a career defining thing for me. It was booking the acting apprenticeship at the Walnut Street Theater, because it meant that for a full year I was going to get paid, even though it was like $300 a week. It was non-taxable.
Yep.
And I got health insurance through the theater and a free gym membership. And I got to take classes at night at their theater school for free. And boy, I just loaded up on every single class that I could possibly take. We toured these kids shows in the morning that were of questionable quality, but it was still like performing. You're still like, even if you're setting a pipe and drape up in a cafeteria, you're still in front of an audience.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's something that's often true in this path where you don't discover it super early. So you're not getting acting classes automatically at 14, 15, 16, whatever, that I do think often you're hungrier. There's just like a hunger to be like, oh my God, I get to do this, like playing pretend, and it gets to be my class and I get to learn about it. There's a different level of like study, I think, often when people come to it a little later.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I didn't have, because I didn't grow up idolizing theater, because I honestly didn't know it existed. I didn't know Broadway existed. So I wasn't eager or over eager to get on any specific stage. I just wanted to act no matter where that was. And I think that worked. That helped me just kind of learn the craft in a way that wasn't, I wasn't trying to just to get anywhere. I think a lot of young actors feel bad about themselves if they don't get like a high enough profile job or something. It's like, no, you still have to learn for like a good
Study
10,
for the
15
love of it and
years.
just learn.
Yeah.
And then tell me about, how do we get to University of Tennessee? How do we get to the MFA?
So I did this show called Shakespeare's R&J. That's four Catholic schoolboys find a copy of Romeo and Juliet. I played Juliet in that production, and it kind of exploded my world. The text came alive in a new way, and then I thought, I want every text to feel this alive, and why isn't it? And so I thought, I was about 29 at this point, and I had been, just auditioning and trying to get jobs. And so I took myself, I was like, you need to, if you're going to really be doing this for the rest of your life, you need to study process and not just be trying to put a product out there. So I put together my audition package, which meant I also was coming in on the Chinatown bus once a week to take an audition class with Karen Kohlhaas at the Atlantic Theater Company, which that class changed my life. It gave me so much agency over my auditions. And it felt like I was able to put on a little show with my monologues instead of it feeling like I had to please people. I just felt like I had like my little one-person show. And so that was I put that package together. I got into Harvard ART, which I think is gone now. National Theater Conservatory, Brown.
Also gone. All these diminishing programs.
Yeah, it's so sad. UC Irvine, which I think is still there. And then Tennessee, which I'd never heard of, and I honestly didn't want to go back down to the South because I had spent my undergrad and a lot of my childhood in the South as well. And so, but there was a guy named Jed Diamond who was a master Alexander teacher and is still, and the classes were good. They were really good. But then part of the program was having 2 private Alexander lessons each week. And when I had never done that before. And when I did that, it completely like rocked my world. And I was like, it was undeniable to me that this was the best program for me. So I
cool.
went back down south.
My God, you're hitting all these podcast. Hey, we got process over product in there. We got choosing the right school for you, even if it's not the biggest name. There's so many good things that are happening
Yeah.
from this. But so then, talk to me a little bit about. So that's an MFA, obviously, an acting training program. But now we're going to see a mix of TV and film and really musical theater on your resume. What was the MT training of it all? Are you taking any voice lessons? Are you taking dance? Where?
Yeah.
How are you? Sort of going to end up on Broadway eventually?
Honestly, it was mostly I have a natural aptitude for it. I remember I went in for one of the auditions that I was going in for early on in my career, and like before I went to get my MFA, and I gave my music to the accompanist, and was telling her the tempo and singing a little bit of the song before she played anything, and she hit the first note, and she was like, "You have perfect pitch."
Hmm.
Because I was singing it like on key or what. I don't, yeah. Anyway, I just think that and I think I had a natural aptitude for it. And so I took like a couple of like singing lessons. And then in grad school, we had a singing lesson once a week. That was 30 minutes, but that was it. That was it for kind of the singing stuff. And then the movement classes was just like, yeah, it was just here and there.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
Suzuki and viewpoints, but you're not necessarily taking high level jazz
No,
classes.
I wasn't in tap ballet, like, yeah, jazz
Yep.
stuff. Yeah.
Okay, well then talk me through. So graduating there, so now you're going to graduate. You're going to be in your 30s. It seems like,
Yeah.
right? So hitting the ground running. I think so many of our listeners feel like if they haven't made it to Broadway by 24, it's too late. Or,
Right.
whatever. Not obviously not the case. But talk me through what is the journey to. It seems like from the resume now, booking How to Get Away with Murder was a really putting you on the map moment. Were there steps up into that, or how did that happen? How do we get to that point where now we're going to be on all of everyone's TV screens?
Yeah. I mean, again, when early on in my 20s, I had taken classes at the Film Actor Studio of Charlotte, which I helped manage so that I could take the classes for free. And
Uh-huh.
there were two great teachers there, Lon Bumgarner and Marilyn Carter. And that was really my first actor training was on camera. And so that
Hmm.
stuff felt more comfortable to me than the theater stuff.
Uh-huh.
Going in for film and TV auditions felt maybe a little bit more natural than somebody who's grown up as a theater kid would be. I didn't feel like, there's something physiologically that happens to everyone when you hear like rolling and action and like all of the, yeah. And I think theater people kind of tense up around those words.
Yep.
But because I had studied at this film acting school for so many years, and we always heard that at the beginning of our scenes, it
Mhm.
just felt so natural to me.
Yep.
So yeah, that was that. That I just went in for the audition. David Caprarioliadis, and he was great. And I was supposed to be in the pilot, but Pete Nowak loved what I did and just kept writing me in until I was a series regular.
It's amazing, amazing. Yeah, there's something so interesting about that. I do think it's really true of film acting. It feels like a version of what we're often telling our students who, when you're working at monologue work at the college level, that like some of the habits you've learned at 10 years old when you're like projecting or like, but really sort of putting a lot out that you go, it can be a lot less, it can be a lot more natural. But it feels like really any theater actor has some version of that they have to unlearn when the camera's on you and we're supposed to be letting ourselves be taken in as opposed
Yeah.
to projecting outward.
Yeah, trusting that it's all there. Like there's still work to be done, but just trusting that it shows up, that the camera catches it because it does. It really does catch everything.
Yep. All right. And will you tell me a little bit about the show? So you did 6 seasons of that show. How many murders were committed on that? I think I saw it the first season, but there was a lot of murders gotten away with.
God, I
How
think
was it?
probably like 7 or 8 murders
My
happened,
God.
maybe more, because there
My
were a
God.
couple per season.
What is that experience? I mean, this is of course now the first big job that we're doing, and it's so many, hopefully some great money. But what was the experience of like now doing season after season after season of that? Also now noticing that you're branching out and doing other things while you're doing The King and I during that
Yeah,
run.
no, it felt great to be a part of a long-term development of a character that, when you do a theater show, it starts where on the first page and ends on the last page. And then when you're
Mm-hmm.
doing 6 seasons of a TV show, you don't know when it's going to end and where your character is going to end up. And the writers, once they get to know you, they start writing for you as well. And so those two, the character and the actor start to merge a lot more
Yeah.
in a long running show.
And
Uh,
how are you adding bits of you? I mean, are you directly giving ideas? Are you like coming in with a yo-yo to be like, my character could have a yo-yo? Like, how are
well,
you sort of subtly implying my character could do these things?
yeah, I think season 5 is when my character got married on Murder, and they were they knew that was a singer, and because I've been, the first 2 seasons I was doing Here Lies Love and then The King and I while I was shooting the show. And they were like, would you want to sing on the show? I was like, sure. And then they asked me like what song, and I love John Legend, and I suggested that song. And at first Pete was like, I don't think we can get the rights. And then all of us the next day he was like, oh, Shonda just called John Legend, who's their friends. And he was like, oh yeah, sure.
That's gotta be nice. That's gotta be nice just to be like, yeah, I'll just dial up John Legend.
Right.
And then speaking of long running shows, I want to come back to King and I too, but you were with Here Lies Love for a decade, right? I feel like the first run
Yeah.
was 2013,
I,
and then
I flew up to New York my third year while I was still in grad school and went into an open call, and that's how I got cast, and that was in 2012, and it just made it to Broadway in 2023, which is
unbelievable.
insane.
That is a journey with a show. And I saw
Yeah.
that show. You were wonderful in it. Wait, my wife wanted me to tell you that she loved you in Dying for Sex too. I was supposed to. That was the homework assignment I got coming in today was to tell you she loved you in
Oh,
it.
thanks. Yeah, what a
And
cool
Mary, of course,
project.
too. Of course.
Thank you.
But let's talk a little bit about. So, tell me about King and I. So, what was the experience? Maybe especially somebody for whom Broadway was not the dream. Of course, maybe it became a little bit more and more. Oh, well, this should be an exciting thing. But like, what was the experience now of being like of a Broadway debut and being on Broadway when that wasn't something that at 17 years old you had an idea of what that was?
I mean, it was so amazing to be working up, because all of my scenes were just with Ashley Park,
Mm-hmm.
and to to have this be my Broadway debut, and also Lincoln Center, although it's technically considered Broadway, it is removed from the district.
Like bougie
Um,
Broadway, comfortable
yeah,
Broadway.
it felt like very cushy, comfy Broadway. The dressing rooms on Broadway are so old, and then the Lincoln Center dressing rooms will have the toilets that warm your bum, and like,
Oh my god! Yeah, we were just backstage at a friend was in Floyd Collins. We were backstage. We're like, this is it's very different than any other Broadway experience I've
you
had.
get
We're like,
so spoiled. So that was it was nice. It was also nice to not be in that overwhelming section of Times Square.
yeah.
We were a little bit in the quieter area, but also to just be able to sing those beautiful songs every night. It's yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better gift as a Broadway debut.
It's so cool. And then, okay, this hit, which we just finished in Oh Mary,
Yeah.
imagine a completely different challenge, completely different experience. What was the experience of getting to do that every night?
Well, it was interesting at the beginning at the Lortel. Alex Timbers came to opening night off Broadway, and afterwards he was like, "I had no idea you could do that." But here's the thing: it's like I'm more of an actor than a musical theater person.
Right.
But when you move to New York and you're an Asian American man, you get put into the Asian musicals like over and over and over again. And then people forget about this completely other like I played Tartuffe in regional theaters. I've done 4 different productions of Romeo and Juliet. I've done Richard III and Midsummer, like all of these amazing plays that I've done.
You're
Just
not playing the Asian character in Richard III.
no, yeah, right, yeah,
Richard III, whoever you are. Yeah.
yeah. And so, like, but that gets lost because the on the commerce side in New York City, because of the history of like the Asian musicals being such big box office hits, your acting resume kind of like you have to remind people, hey, look, I've done all this stuff too. And so that felt great doing something like playing Abraham Lincoln and people being like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, we didn't
Hmm.
know. And I'm like, yeah, if you give people more opportunities to show their range, they will show you their range.
It's so well said. I think it's true with so many musical theater actors too, because it is such a difficult art form that if we know you do this, you can get labeled as a musical theater comedy person. Where you're like, well, wait a
Right.
second, this person also has this completely other skill set that you might even intellectually know about, but it's hard to get people out of the perception of like that's what you won the Tony for. You're just a goofy actor who does this thing. Or, yeah,
Right. Yeah. And also like swings on Broadway, they're always get known as being great. I think somebody joked with me, like, if you're ever a swing, don't become too good at it because people
oh for
will
sure,
always,
you're too
they're
useful,
so
you're too
valuable.
valuable. Anyone will
Yeah.
be a lead. It's hard to be a swing. Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
All right, we're starting to touch on a great conversation, which is the second half of the podcast. I want to talk a little bit more about is talk about Asian representation. So let's take a quick break, and in the back end, we're going to talk a little bit more about Asian representation and the scholarship fund that you've started. So
Yeah.
back in a flash. All right, we are back with Conrad Ricamora, and I want to talk a little bit about this wonderful scholarship fund. It's called The Right to Be There. Will you tell me a little bit about the intention behind starting it, and then we maybe can get into some also the controversy of what it came out of.
Yeah, have a very deep belief that talent is spread evenly, but access is not. And when you come from a marginalized group, you don't always have the same access to training, let alone like roles and stuff like we had previously
Mhm.
just talked about. So I wanted to create something that invested in the younger generation of Asian American male actors, which, because I have such a specific knowledge of all of the different pathways it takes to get
Mhm.
to making a living in this industry as an Asian American male actor, I wanted to be laser focused. I feel like, and I felt like I could make the most impact with that type of scholarship. And so it's still very much coming together. It came out of the need to make some positive movement forward.
Yeah.
And because you get into this industry. I've been in New York now for 13 years, and immediately when you move here as an Asian American man, every interview is asked. You get asked about representation and diversity and blah blah blah, and I've kind of gotten to the point where it's like I want to make some action in
Yeah.
a positive way, and because you just get tired of talking about it.
And you
Not
have a
here
sense
though, Charlie. Not here.
not here. No, this is okay because we knew we were talking about it today. No,
Yeah.
you have a sense of like of what angles you might attack with that. I mean, I know certainly there's angles within the business. I know something that Telly talked about. Telly the Young was our first ever podcast guest. He was talking
Oh,
about like when he was a young person, he didn't really like he didn't think like his parents didn't think like that was possible for him. He was just like that's just not what we did. You know,
right.
his parents were a doctor, or you do these things. Like even the idea of him seeing himself in that, I guess. Yeah. What are the angles, or what are the way? How do you solve for that problem? I guess.
Well, I think it starts with your training. I feel like I've had to. You have to have such a strong foundation to stand on, and because I've had so many great teachers through since I started acting, I feel like I can walk into any room and with multiple characters and move forward in a story. And so I want to provide that for younger people, and also apart because this is still like formulating in my head. I've never started. I didn't even plan on this. I was like, I have to do something, and so I just typed up something really quickly and put it on GoFundMe, and then all of a sudden it took off like crazy. So now
That's still like $66,000 you guys have raised. Some
it's like
very large
60 something thousand dollars now. Yeah.
great.
But my dream is to, all of my friends that are in the industry, my dream is to once a year uh, select from applicants that we pay for them to come to New York City and take like a week of classes with people like Telly, with people like Kelvin Moonlow, with people like BD Wong, with
Mhm.
myself included, and that we do. That's part of the scholarship program where they're not only taking classes, but they're building relationships with mentors, and
Yeah.
then we award a certain amount of a scholarship at the end of that week. So yeah, that's kind of my
Sure.
dream for it. Yeah.
It's super exciting. And can we talk a little bit about the kind of controversy moment that it came out of? So this is odd for us because I know it came out of the maybe happy ending controversy, which Helen Chen is an MTCA alumni and was a podcast guest. We were all going to see the show like as this was happening. Like we're bringing 300 people to go see the show, and we're like, oh my gosh. Can we just talk a little bit about what that experience in terms of the, I think it was a lot of outrage and pain in the AIPI community, especially with like, it's what her real life boyfriend was going to be replacing Darren Criss, who's an Asian
Yeah.
actor, right? That feels like that was started the moment of what was happening in sort of around social media and a little bit of controversy there.
Yeah, again, it's more like the scholarship to me was in recognition of decades of pain
Mm-hmm.
that Asian American men have experienced in, you know, having access only to characters that were emasculated and
Mm-hmm.
stereotyped, and not being able to, walk on stage and walking on stage and being asked to diminish our humanity, and then being denied certain roles. And so it wasn't from any one moment. Again, it's like, if it was one moment that the scholarship came out of, I don't think that there would have been a scholarship if it was just isolated. It was more of like, okay, let's put some positive motion forward. And all of my friends had been, posting about how painful this controversy was, because it brings up other experiences that we've gone through as well. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to address that, like the long standing pain and inequity, and put it into a positive forward motion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's well said. I love to ask you a question. We asked a couple different people from all different groups and all different kinds of people, sort of just their perspective on identity in theater in 2025. And I'll give sort of like, I feel like most people, would agree. There's probably aren't exactly black and white rules of where exactly you draw the line, but like we generally agree, like white people shouldn't be wearing blackface on stage, and we kind of agree that like a non-murderer can play a murderer. So you can play some lived experiences. We kind of agree on there, but that how do you sort of see theaters, and how do you see casting directors, and how do you see us navigating these questions of like of who can play what, and how that should be considered and how those conversations should be had?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, again, like you said, the word conversation, I do think it has to be an ongoing conversation. I think that we need to have an honest look at statistics on Broadway, and then adjust what our expectation and what our work, like, frankly, what the work that we have to do to represent the populations that we're inhabiting. And I mean, you ride the subway and you see what the makeup of New York City is. And then you go to a Broadway show and that doesn't necessarily, it's not always necessarily reflected back. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that takes a long time to, like, there's more things at play than just casting, that there's, the business side of things as well. But to keep having those conversations and moving, again, towards, positive steps forward, I think are something. I do like your question about identity, though, because I think theater is the best place for us to come together and let go of our identities, and I maybe identify with somebody that is not doesn't have our same lived experience, but because we're all tied together through the same humanity, we're allowed to we're able to connect in those ways.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just conscious of like how these conversations happen. We've had a little bit of this conversation on the pod a couple of times of like in different forums and with different kinds of people. Of course, we know social media is not the best place for any of these conversations to
Not
have any
super
kind of nuanced
nuanced.
conversation. Yeah, but like I remember my wife was the lead in Jagged Little Pill, and there was this big controversy around Jagged Little Pill, and I remember my mom, my pretty liberal, informed mom who reads the New York Times, could not understand the controversy. She was like, I don't understand. Aren't they both LGBTQ? Like, I
Yeah.
don't understand what the issue is, right? Like, and I wonder like, I guess, what would you say if we had listeners who maybe are not the most keyed into New York Broadway and New York theater? Like, if someone were to say, wait, I don't understand, the person's playing a robot. Why is this is an issue? Like, what would the sort of conversation to somebody who's not as locked in be?
I think it's again, taking a hard look at the statistics of the roles that are available for, let's say, and having those hard conversations, which, I mean, I would rather people do that work themselves than me like sit here on your screen and preach. That never goes well for anyone. So I would say, take a look at the statistics for representation for um, Asian American men on Broadway, and the number of roles that are, written for Asian American men, or not written for Asian American men, and that are not including Asian American men. And then look at it through that lens of, hard, how would it be for a up and coming like musical theater person to see that, this a show that they thought represented an opportunity maybe for them in the future was now not guaranteed, in addition to so many other opportunities that they're not even considered they're not even in the conversation for at all. Yeah, and just sitting with that, and allowing those statistics to inform
What
you.
about the other end of it? So, I mean, that totally makes sense to the person who goes, "Hey, I don't understand the statistics." What about to like a lot of our student listeners who, I mean, so many of our students will talk about representation is really important to me. This is like a big issue that I care about, and I want to help forward that. But I think a lot of them feel like I'm not sure what to do from an actor's perspective versus the creatives and what can a young person who goes, I really care about whether it's AAPI representation or representation across the board. What can a young actor and artist do to sort of to help with that? To sort of, it's like we often talk with politics, like I can go vote every 4 years, but what do I do? Like if this is something that really matters to me.
Yeah, I would say like the thing that I did was I learned a lot of monologues from a lot of different, especially with Shakespeare. Like I would say learn, because you can dive into different characters on your own by learning those monologues. Like I learned Iago, I learned Julius Caesar, Juliet, even like. But so if you are a student, I would say just go and grab a hold of any material you want and learn how to work on it to make it your own, and then
Yeah.
do something completely opposite. Like find contrasting things to work on constantly, especially when you're in your 20s. Just constantly be working at one end of the spectrum, and then, okay, great, I worked on this song or this monologue, and then go to the other side and find something completely different. Yeah, and then just go to as many open calls as you possibly can, even if you're not right for it. Just like give yourself go to the open call. You get to perform like whatever you're getting to perform. That's my advice. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Even if you don't necessarily have full control over how they're going to see you, you're at least giving them a chance to see you how you want to
Yeah. Yeah, and you're getting a chance to perform and gain experience. Again, it takes like 10 to 15 years to master something, but you have to be putting yourself out there and doing it.
Yep. I love it. If people want to help this specific scholarship fund, what's the best thing? Do you need money? Do you need volunteers? Do you need, what's the thing that you go, should it be click this link and pay some money or what are the best ways for people to help the right to be there?
Yeah, the GoFundMe page is still up. I've just partnered with E2AC, which is Entertainment to Affect Change.
Uh-huh.
The producer, Diana DeMena, connected me with them. So they're a 501c3. I'm learning all of these new terminology.
Right. Well,
So I'm going to be incorporating the GoFundMe funds with E2AC soon. Once my schedule like dies down and filming is wrapped and all of that stuff. But the GoFundMe is still up and will be still up for the foreseeable future. So I would say go and
we'll
donate
toss
that
that
way.
link in the chat or in the show notes of this very podcast so people can click that and give a little bit of money. Any secrets you can give us about Devil Wears Prada? Anything you want to,
Oh,
what spoilers? I mean, not to spoil the whole thing, but any,
yeah, they
who are
can't.
you? Do
I
we get
can't
share
even
that?
say who I'm playing. Yeah,
Oh
they
my
weren't
gosh.
even. Yeah, they. Yeah.
You're
There,
Meryl Streep's dad, is what I'm going to say. It's a really complicated. We talk about identity. You're playing across age. It's really beautiful.
I will say in the table read, I think I'm allowed to say this, that they hadn't cast one of the major roles yet.
Mhm.
And so they were like, well, your cast is this, but would you mind reading opposite Meryl for this major role at the table read? And so I like
Mine?
my soul kind of floated above my body and watched me do that, which was the only way I could get through it, was to completely dissociate.
That is so cool. I'm sure very few actors would mind getting to read opposite Meryl
Ye-
Streep when given the
Yeah,
opportunity.
just
Um,
the best.
I love it. Well, we'd like to wrap. You've already given some really great advice to actors in different ways, but we like to wrap with just, advice to young artists out there. Though also, we sometimes, because we have plenty of parent listeners, we would take, if you prefer, advice to parents. But basically, just if they want to become a younger or now older Conrad Ricamora, like what advice would you have to them in terms of how they can find their way to that path?
I would say focus on the work. Somebody told me that one of my earliest teachers in Charlotte said, focus on the work. And there is so much noise in this industry, and it's great celebratory noise sometimes, but it has nothing to do with actually showing up to rehearsal or to a performance to the theater every night. And so I would tell a young person to read a lot of plays, grab monologues that move you, and then start expanding to characters that you think are so different from you. You'll start learning that, oh, I can inject my humanity into any character, and continue to work on your voice. And this sounds weird, but do a lot of yoga, because that flexibility allows you to inhabit different, not just, it allows you to play other than who you walk around in your life as.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I'm going to add on to that. Keep doing the yoga because, boy, in college I did all this yoga. I was so flexible, and then you hit your 30s, it all goes. I'm like, I can still do yoga. I'm like, oh, maybe not. Maybe it's gone.
You got to get that mat back out.
I got to get the mat back out. I got to get the headstand back out. There's a lot of things I had confidence in that are no longer in my body. Conrad, we so appreciate the time. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Charlie.
Yes, yes, yes. Loved getting to chat with Conrad, a man of much range. And I think a really exciting career in terms of like working in different mediums, which I feel like so many of our young students want to emulate, right? To be able to have done a really successful play at a high level, a musical at a high level, a TV show at a high level, a movie at a high level. I just feel like for so many people, that is the goal. And, it's like our own personal EGOT, other than the awards, just to be able to like, man, I can do this and this and this and this and have success in it. I think that's what so many people are shooting for. I have a bunch of takeaways from today, so I'm going to try to do some quick hitters first. We talked before about like the sports analogies and how those individual sports especially relate to them, with the idea of like sports psychology and the actor's mindset and how those are related. I often use the free throw line as my favorite version of that, being a basketball fan, but it's absolutely true in tennis as well. I will tell you as a side note, I played tennis the other day for the first time in over a decade, and I absolutely trounced one of our young, fit coaches who challenged me to a match. He thought he encountered this old guy with his dad bod, and I hadn't played tennis in a while. I was honest. I was like, I used to be good, but I haven't played in a while. And he thought he was going to embarrass me. He's in his 20s. He's, got the six pack. Sadly, 6'2", 6'1", 6'2" in sets. But the important thing is the psychology of watching his life drain before my eyes is what we're really talking about. No, in all seriousness, that's me being funny and, of course, braggadocious. But I do really like Conrad's comparison of like bombing in the way that he talked about it, right? We all have that experience as an actor, like when you're not fully in it and it's going badly, and just how hard it is to not let it go all the way dark, right? And that absolutely happens in sports too. It happened to our young coach, who I'm going to let remain nameless for the sake of his ego. Especially when we're talking about those like individual sports, and then that experience of like being in an audition and what that experience is. Once a pitcher loses the strike zone and they get in your head, it's so hard to get it back, right? We really do have to be as mentally strong as we are physically. And that speaks a bit to that conversation from the opener about how are we maintaining our psychological and emotional health going into a match or going into an audition as well. And I know we've talked about this before, but just another example of like the permeable membrane when we talk about the line between acting and musical theater once you get into the real world. Again, that's not to say there's not a significant difference in training programs. There is a significant difference, or even in the skill sets that you might be able to leave school with when you're attending a musical theater program versus an acting program. But it's all to say, in the professional world, for a lot of roles, there really is more of a spectrum in terms of like what those things really mean. It's not like there's acting roles and there's musical theater roles. There's like the skill set to cover a role, which I think may be the most difficult musical theater thing. That would mean like intense dance experience, high level musicianship, and then enough acting chops to play multiple roles. That might be like the most musical theater a role could be. We talked about that with covers, right? And how hard it is to replace them, right? And then there's the roles where it's like mostly acting and you have to sing a bit, right? On the two ends. And then there's everything in between, right? There's not a line that's distinguished and this becomes a really musical theater role and this is more of an acting role. It is much more of a spectrum than like a hard line. Just as we talked about before with Bryce Pinkham or John Bellman, Dakin Matthews, Gabe Ebert, Sean Allen Krill. I could name another 10 just off the top of my head of people who are specifically trained as actors, but their biggest professional roles ended up being in musicals, who also were podcast guests, right? So just to say that it's totally possible. And that's actually not to make people any less excited about musical theater training and all the wonderful things that can give you, but really to say to our actors, don't close that door to professional possibilities if you don't have to, right? If you're not the strongest dancer, I wouldn't necessarily mean that gives up on your singing training, right? If you're not the strongest singer, can you work on it to go from pretty good to good, right? You never know what might still be possible for you. So just leave those doors open. And again, a lot of the money comes in musical theater. Okay, and I think we touched this briefly in the interviews, but I'm not sure we've done it as deeply in the takeaways before. So I want to talk a little bit about that idea of apprenticeship and its value. I'm a big fan of it in general. I don't think it's perfect. I do think there's some issues with like internship culture in general in American professional life, and maybe some of the ways in which these acting companies that are not always amazing to their apprentices. I think that is an issue. But I do really think the specific idea of like you learn by doing and acting is so true. And it's especially true if you're able to do it in an environment which is like supported educationally for the veteran actors to teach and guide the younger actors, right? I just watched The Pit. So if anyone's watched The Pit, like a lot how doctors do it with the attendings and the residents and the interns, right? That they're like learning while doing, but they're having these levels and having people watch while they do it and then have the ability to step into roles, right? It's just a really helpful way to learn, right? I talk about how this happens in school anyway, right? How much I'm a firm believer that you learn as much from your classmates as you do from your professors. That is absolutely true, even if you're all on the same level. And of course, this is true. Keep making sports analogies. It's true for sports too, right? That you learn as much from your teammates as you would from your coaches, right? But in school, short of maybe you get a bit of this with like seniors and freshmen, that there's some levels in there, but really there isn't the same idea of levels that you would have with residents and attendings and interns or whatever, and the doctors of it all, right? For the most part, the seniors should still really be actively learning too. It's not like they're like, I'm all set at 22 years old, right? And the experience of like when I got to work alongside someone like Dakin Matthews, who was doing his 12 millionth Shakespeare show, it's just a different kind of learning experience from someone who's had that long of a professional career, has achieved that much success when you're sitting and watching and absorbing it all. So often we talk, especially for musical theater majors, of like the value of summer stock and like really cutting your teeth and getting to play lead roles, how exciting that is. I'm definitely a fan of that. Nothing to discourage that. But also finding those strong apprenticeship programs where you can, even if the pay is a bit less, right? Being in that forced learning environment with people who are really strong or really at the top of their careers can be really cool too. And I liked how like Conrad described it almost like going to jail, right? You could barely pay for your food, but you got a free gym membership. So you basically like spend a year getting buff and learning about theater. It really is a cool thing. Not necessarily going to jail, but the apprenticeship is a cool thing. Okay, and then two more things. Maybe my favorite thing I heard listening back, which I really didn't catch the first time as I was listening through of exactly what Conrad was saying, was just this idea, he was describing doing a monologue where the character in the monologue had an experience that Conrad said was really his own experience and how meaningful that was for him. For the first time he played that character, he's like speaking about this life experience that he really had, and then it really clicked for him, right? I know we talk about material choice all the time here, but I just think this is a really great example of what I mean when I say you should choose stuff that you capital K know about, that you really know about, right? It doesn't mean that the situation in the song or the monologue needs to actually have happened to you the way Conrad is talking about. But if there's something in the character or there's something in the writing that touches something deep in you that you really connect to, even if it's imaginatively, right? Even if you didn't necessarily have this exact experience, but maybe you had a similar experience, or there's something about this experience that strikes a chord in you, that strikes something in you, it can really unlock this magical thing that happens to actors, which we talk about called point of view, right? Point of view is such a powerful, magical thing. Why do I want to see your Hamlet when there's been a million Hamlets? I haven't seen your point of view, right? And I do think that process, that unlocking of point of view, I do think it's one that often has to actively be unblocked for students. So I don't know what the situation Conrad was in when it happened, but I often talk about this as a coach with Shakespeare of like how satisfying an experience it is to turn on that particular light bulb for me. And it really happens across the board with just expression. That's not just with Shakespeare, right? But when a student realizes that they have something to say, some way of connecting to a song or a monologue that goes beyond just the text or the idea of the character or how they think it's supposed to sound, and they go, oh, this is me. I actually have something special and unique to add to this piece that may be different than how other people have done it before because there's a bit of me in it, right? It feels like something young people often just need like permission to fully make the leap and do, right? When they watch their favorite Broadway star make a piece their own, they go, well, yeah, of course they're allowed to do that because it's Erica Henningsen or it's Andrew Rannells or whatever it is, right? He gets to do it, she gets to do it, right? But you get to do that too. This is a bit about selection and a bit about permission to really bring all of yourself to a piece. But I really like that Conrad tracked that as a moment that unlocked future training for him, right? I think that like click happens for a lot of our students around this age as they go through the process, right? And it's often not at the beginning of the process, it often happens later in the process, right? But it's one of my favorite things about doing this each year is just watching that happen with our students, watching that click and watching them step into their own and watching them really take their own point of view. And I encourage all of you to seek it sooner than later if you can. Okay, and the last thing that I'm going to say is basically just ending where we began with social media. I really appreciate Conrad's gameness and answering some of the questions the way that he did, especially some of the questions that touched on controversy. And I also understand, it may not be his favorite version of the conversation to have, right? I try to have these conversations around identity and casting. I try to have them in multiple ways on the podcast because it is a conversation that I find particularly fascinating. And I think it is relevant to all of you. I think a lot of people find it interesting and it is kind of a hot button issue in our industry right now. But the part that we kind of glossed over, maybe this brings us back to where we started with social media and how terrible a place it is. But, we kind of glossed over the idea in the conversation that social media is a terrible place to have these conversations, but it's really true, right? And it's not just the problem of social media and the lack of nuance, even though that's absolutely an issue too. But I do think we end up getting wrapped up in what I'm going to call edge cases, or what like politicians might call like third rail issues. And I think in hearing Conrad sidestep a bit of the specifics of the controversy, he's really highlighting the most important part of the conversation. And it is the vast area where the vast, vast majority of artistic people would agree, which is that there should be more opportunities for AAPI actors on Broadway, full stop, right? That there is a historic lack of representation and that more opportunities for actors of color in general, but especially for actors from the AAPI community are just indisputably a good thing, right? And the reason I think it's worth saying that obvious part out loud is that I think sometimes in focusing on the cases which maybe are the most interesting, like this, right? People can get bogged down and distracted from that larger truth, right? And again, I'm going to try to avoid making a lot of larger political analogies, which of course I'm sure you could make for yourself. We talk about all kinds of issues. We talk about economic inequality or 1,000 other issues you could talk about. We get bogged down in these edge cases, these third rails, instead of going, hey, well, we really agree on this large swath of it, right? And I know a lot of people who would generally agree with that broader statement about representation, who might get bogged down arguing this specific case or that specific case. In this case, whether that's from a personal perspective because they know Helen or Andrew, or whether it's about the creative team or he's playing a robot of it all, or any of these plenty of points which you could debate. But I think the larger point of a community of people saying there's been a history of this, and this is just another painful example, and then having people respond back. And they're saying, well, here's why your latest example isn't actually as valid as you think. It's painful in multiple ways. It's not just because you're invalidating this particular experience, but it's because you're missing the first half of the sentence, right? And that's what I think the online world is particularly bad at doing, right? We argue people's political points. We argue their arguments, which is like the part of the iceberg that's poking up out of the water. And we don't necessarily hear the whole larger perspective of their experiences, which is what's lurking underneath the water, right? And that is the part as artists that is our job to do, right? It's our job to understand the whole human being and what's behind those words, all the words that they're saying and the words that they're not saying, right? It's what is underneath the surface, what is underneath the water is our job as artists, right? So I guess to bring us all back to this full circle here, alongside with being careful with our social media diet, which we talked about in the opening, I give you all the challenge as artists to become better listeners. It's something I am constantly reminding myself, not just to listen to what people say, but to listen to what's behind it. What about their life experience makes them have this perspective? And also, like, what are they really trying to say? Are they making an arcane political point? And is that the part to respond to? Or are they speaking from a place of pain? And can I hear and acknowledge that pain rather than respond to the logic of their argument and get into an argument about the political point? It's way easier said than done. But I do think that kind of deeper listening, it'll make you a better artist. It'll make you a better human being. And I think it can serve as a bit of a countering force to the toxicity of social media and all the shouting into the void. And with that, another episode of Mapping the College Audition, which is shouted into this particular void every Wednesday due to the excellent producing of Meghan Cordier and Kelly Prendergast, with social media work by Jordan Rice. Please do follow us at Mapping the College Audition and rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, where you can test out the limits of my accent and dialect work in these reviews. And as always, check us out at MTCA.com for help with your individual college prep needs. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, please trust that you are enough for the right program exactly as you are right now. Now keep striving and examine that social media diet. We'll catch you next week.